Started a series the other day about the best guard releases of 2017. We began with Guardians in the first episode, and now it's time for the second one. Today we're talking about Hunters. Now, as always, this is just my opinion. Obviously, people are gonna have different opinions on this, depending on their preference in terms of character, playstyle, in terms of just the characters in general, or their favorite character. I am trying to base this mostly on the state in which the character was released, if they were too strong or too weak, how balanced they felt overall, how good their kit felt overall, and how everything else tied in with that. For example, like if there was any lore that worked towards it, or it was just a very bland kit overall, and things like that. But I understand that a best of will always be highly opinionated either way, so if you disagree, that absolutely is fine. I understand that. This is just my take on it. We had two Hunter releases in 2017. The first one was Cernunnos, the Celtic Hunter, and later in the year we had Hachiman, the Japanese Hunter. Now, Cernunnos was released pretty early in the year. He was released in March, whereas Hachiman came out kind of recently in October. But still, both are at this point in a state where we call them somewhat balanced, at least, not completely broken in either direction. So I think it's fair to make a comparison at this point. Now, Cernunnos was a bit of a crazy release. When he came out, his 2 Bramble Blast would actually slow as well upon hitting an enemy in any place of the ability. So overall, he had a crazy amount of CC between that root, that slow, and his ultimate, which made him very hard to deal with, and on top of that, he still had the slow in his 1. He also receives up to 20% free lifesteal through Shifter of Seasons and had relatively high base power. His ultimate has a very wide radius, and certain other things about him had to be adjusted later down the road as well. His scaling on Summer Heat was 20%, basically making it unnecessary to ever swap to anything else if you didn't want to, because the extra damage was just ridiculous. And this particular damage actually had to be nerfed twice, first down to 10%, and after that was still too strong, it was nerfed down to 5% to put him a bit more in line with other hunters. The cooldown of Bramble Blast was also increased from 30 to 15 seconds, his Horn Charge base damage was decreased, especially at early ranks, and the Wild Hunt ultimate cooldown was increased as well. So a lot of nerfs went into this character until he was at least considered somewhat balanced. Cernunnos maybe wasn't the most broken and busted release we ever had, mainly due to the fact that he was not the best at fighting a large number of opponents. He was still very, very good at it, don't get me wrong, but there were just others that in the release state were better at it, like Bellona. But at the same time, his lane pressure was just insane. He had the self-sustain, he had the high damage, and in a 1v1 trade, he would pretty much always win against anyone. He also was very, very easy to pick up, which was kinda against what he was intended to be designed as he just had these insane damage numbers, and you could still get away with just using the slow stance and consistently slowing enemies between your 2 and your normal slow and your root, and then the ultimate. So you could basically beat them half to death before they could even use anything against you, and if they tried to get away, well, good luck to them. On top of all that, even his escape was incredibly good to secure kills early on because the base damage values were pretty high for an escape ability. So all in all, it was just absolutely horrendous to have to lane against him at all. As such, in terms of release balance, Cernunnos takes a big L. But that's not to say that his kit in itself was a terrible idea. Now, his 1 is probably a bit problematic. I just think that there's one part of it that just shouldn't exist, which is the bonus physical damage. If it was only lifesteal and a debuff and a slow and then some other kind of utility, I think it would be a lot more interesting because there would be a lot more reason to swap between stances overall, rather than just having this extra damage all the time, or most of the time at least. And the only way to prevent that is nerfing the bonus damage so much that it's pretty much not worth using anymore over other stances. So I kinda don't like that part of his design, because otherwise the 1 would be a very interesting ability. Shifter of Seasons has this concept of allowing you to play towards different playstyles, adjust your playstyle depending on what you want to do exactly. If you need to slow someone who's running away, you slow them, and if you need some more lifesteal to sustain, then you do that. But as it stands, most stances aren't really used as effectively as you'd want them to by most people. And I think this is unfortunate because it could really bring some complexity to the character that the rest of his kit doesn't have all too much of, for obvious reasons, because it's all in the 1 already. In that same sense, it's a bit unfortunate how these stances are sorted, specifically because often you just want to have more damage but the protection shred as well. So you want to go from the autumn debuff to the summer heat debuff, which has always been awkward because you have to tap 3 times to switch between those stances, rather than having the summer one being the one that reduces the protections and the autumn one that increases the damage. that would make his whole ability chain a lot more conclusive, I would say, a lot more structured. That, I think, is a design flaw that could have easily been ironed out at the start, and now it's a little bit too late because people are used to it. But the complaints were there from the start, and I think that's a minus to his kit overall as well, because that's something that just shouldn't have gone through like this, unless it was to intentionally increase the difficulty of the character, similar to ZiSotto, which I never think is a good idea. If you make a character more clunky to make them more difficult, it's kind of not what it should be. Outside of that, his kit is very straightforward, is a decent amount of damage between all his abilities. He's got a clear, he's got an escape, and he's got a big CC ultimate. You can also use the root into the ultimate to set that up, so you can make sure that an enemy stays inside of that. You can hard engage with your 3 to clear up a kill after using your 2. You can chase someone down with the 1 after hard engaging, so I think there's a decent amount of synergy overall. The cleave damage from his basic attacks feels a little more like a gimmick that maybe were intended to make him a bit more viable in the jungle. Didn't really work out too well overall. He was played in jungle for a while and he wasn't completely bad there, but he just turned out to be a better ADC overall with his stances and everything. So yeah, the idea was there. It didn't really work out 100%. Because realistically, against most hunters, you don't just walk up to the wave and clear with the cleave. The only thing where it really does make a difference is when pushing down structures, which is otherwise his weak point. So in essence, I think there were a lot of good ideas in Cernunnos' kit, a lot of things that could have been good, but weren't all that well executed, and were also kinda outshone by the fact that he was just completely broken at the start and needed a lot of nerfs to go in line with other characters, and by that point it was already a little bit too late. So let's look at the other hunter of 2017. And that is Hachiman. With Hachiman, the first thing that's interesting is that aside of some bug fixes, the only real patch that changed him was 4.19. He got a few buffs, a few nerfs in that patch, so the ammo of Eagle Eye was increased, his movement speed was increased, the damage of Eagle Eye was reduced, Yaitsu's cooldown was reduced, and the damage from the ultimate, Mounted Archery, was adjusted. Overall, more buffs than nerfs, but nothing out of this world. At the same time, Hachiman is now considered a very high tier hunter in the competitive scene, or was at least the last time he was played there, which kinda hints at potential future nerfs, but probably also not too crazy nerfs. One big complaint about Hachiman when he was released by many was that his kit is not interesting, that it's too boring, too bland, not enough going on. But what that also does is it makes the kit in itself a lot more easy to balance, from my perspective at least. If you don't have that complex ability set like Cernunnos 1, if you just have one ability per button that deals a certain amount of damage that you can easily tune up or down, then it makes things in the balancing department a lot easier. Hachiman's kit had a passive that most people were even wondering about why it's there, basically just giving him extra MP5 that stack up upon hitting enemies with basic attacks. That's absolutely nothing crazy, but at the same time the rest of his kit was good enough to warrant a not so strong passive. And the extra lane sustain that he would get out of it is still good enough. Now obviously in a different meta where not every hunter is going a starter item with MP5 plus Bamba's Mask, this may actually have more of an impact, but that's a story for another day. Hachiman's 2 and 3 are very straightforward abilities. The 2 is just a, well, circle AoE damaging ability with an attack speed storage attached to it. The only special thing about it maybe is that you have to walk into that area to get the double attack speed boost if you're Hachiman. And his 3 is just a dash with a bit of a unique mechanic through the potential stun if you hit in this particular area of the ability, but that's about it. It's mechanically interesting enough to be at least somewhat challenging, and in a way it's maybe unique as well, but it's definitely not out of this world new or crazy. Same with the 1. The 1 is an extended range, which does help in teamfights especially and gives him a bit of a SLOTH as an ADC feeling. Kinda the only other ADC that has something like that is Shibalanke, and for him it's only in his ult, not as a regular ability. And then you have his ultimate, which is kind of Guan Yu's ult but in ranged, in a very interesting way when it comes to aim, because you control the movement through WASD while aiming with a mouse, and that can be separate from each other, which, by the way, really throws off some newer players that are not aware of that. I think Hachiman's kit in comparison to Cernunnos doesn't have as much depth, but I also think that's absolutely okay. I find that Hachiman's kit is unique enough to still have fun playing the character, and though he may need some further adjustments, that's another story overall. He's definitely not as broken as a release as Cernunnos was. As such, Hachiman is the clear winner when it comes to guard design for hunters in Smite in 2017, in my opinion. I'd rather see a guard with 1 or 2 unique abilities that stand out to some degree and just have the feel for the character right, than being tangled up in all too complex god designs that just make it super hard to balance the characters or everything else. Kind of what we saw with Red Tusker in the past as well. And with that, thank you guys for watching. The series will continue in the following days. I'm still at HRX currently. See you for the next one then, probably tomorrow or the day after. If you're new to the channel and enjoy this kind of content, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out, and it sometimes also gives you the chance to win some codes in the description down below. DukeSloth out. So I actually figured out my demonetization issue, and it was my outro. As such, feel free to click any of the links around here right now. There will be new outro music as soon as I find something nice. Until then, as you guys requested, I will do the outro music myself. You're welcome.